there's nothing wrong with having values in your organization. We can debate whether that's the right one or this one or that one. That's not the friggin' point.
Right.
The friggin' point is those describe who you are.
Yes.
They don't describe what you do.
That's the difference. It's words on a paper or a placard that you see in a wall. It's not the behavior that is consistent of the individual.
Today's video is brought to you by Grey Fox Strategic and Carcajou Tactical. For 10% off your next purchase, use code DA10.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Direct Action Podcast. We got a great guest today. I'm so stoked and super excited that Mark Norman, a retired former military member, so he was the vice of the Chief of Defense Staff, is sitting with us today. We have a mutual friend he's been trying to get us to connect for quite some time and just hang out. We've had, I think, one or two, maybe real short social conversations in the past, but here we are today. So thank you very much for making the time.
Randy, awesome. Thanks for reaching out, and I look forward to our conversation.
Likewise. Let's get it started. So Mark, tell us a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? What was your family lineage like, and how did you get started in your journey with the Canadian Armed Forces?
Yeah, so I was born into a military family in the early mid '60s. Mm-hmm. So your viewers can do the math. My dad was a serving officer in the Royal Canadian Regiment, an infantry officer, one of Canada's three primary regular force infantry regiments, as you know, and I grew up kind of in Ontario primarily. We lived in the UK for a while. Grew up in Quebec, Atlantic provinces, bounced around a lot, as you'd imagine. Right. You know, your listeners can relate. 11 schools in 9 different locations. Oh, wow. As a kid. But I grew up around the military. My dad's social network, although he did other things, was primarily military. I had lots of adopted aunts and uncles and mentors as a kid who were all military. And so that, that's the short version. And then it was time to go to university. I gave the military college a try, didn't really like it, went left, and then came back to Kingston, which is where we were living at the time, which is kind of where my career started. Right. I started as a reservist between grade 12 and 13, back when we had 13 grades in Ontario. Yeah. And I'd been a sailing instructor at the one of the local sailing clubs in Kingston. And so I was looking for something that paid a little better. And, that there was the Navy Reserve unit in the town, Cataraqui, it's called, HMCS Cataraqui, had a summer program. Mm-hmm. And so I signed up and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, well, this is really cool. I kind of, I think I could make a career out of this. I love the water. I love the sailing. People were great. Yeah. And so it just kind of ticked a lot of boxes. And like I said, I tried the milk call route. It didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. Different path. Everybody's got their own. They got to make their own path. And I went back to university, graduated, and then signed up in the regular force. And literally 39 years later, I kind of went, holy crap, what happened?
Where did the time go?
Yeah, it was awesome. A lot of time at sea, more than some, less than others. Mm-hmm. Everything's relative, primarily on the East Coast. But just absolutely loved the operational side of it, loved the people. And then, got a little more senior and had to do a little different work. That's the short version of, how did I end up here? When
you were at RMC, how many years did you end up doing there? 1, 2 years?
I was gone by my Christmas of my first year. Oh, yeah. It's interesting because it was I was what? I don't know, 18, 19. I don't even remember. I was so stressed out about leaving because my father was still serving. Yeah. And I thought, this is I'm letting the team down. It was like a quitter, and it just wasn't a right fit for me. Right. Still got, some incredible friends from back then. Yep. Some have passed, some died, unfortunately, in service, but a lot of them still kicking around. And the friendships are still solid. It just wasn't the path for me.
And where was your dad serving at that time? So he was with the RCRs. You were in Kingston at the college, and he would have been located.
Well, actually, I was at the one in Victoria, Royal Roads.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so he was doing some senior officer stuff as a rookie 1-star. He ended up, and part of the thing was he ended up being the commandant at RMC just as I was leaving, or just after I left.
Right.
So we knew this was happening, and
Right.
I was, the stuff you don't think of when you're 18 and 19 years old, right? Oh, this is terrible. How does this look for you? You're taking over the college, and your son is quitting, and all this stuff goes through your head because you don't know any better, right?
And how was that conversation with your dad? So you told him, listen, I don't think RMC is for me. Looking at doing something else. How did he?
He was awesome. He was really supportive. There'd never been any pressure, implied or otherwise, to even try it. And he was really supportive, and he just wanted to make sure that I had given it an honest try, and that, I wasn't just reacting emotionally to something I didn't like. And he respected the decision. And I think part of it was we both knew that I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to continue a career.
Yeah.
That just wasn't the path I wanted to go down.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was good. And we would joke. He was Army, I was Navy. There'd be jokes around the house all our lives. But fundamentally, there was a great sense of camaraderie and professional, mutual respect. I had enormous respect for him. And as I got older, my respect grew because I started to see things through a different lens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good for you. So you leave RMC, and then now you're doing some further education. And where did you go for the
I ended up at Queen's.
Queen's? And what were you studying?
I studied economics and international relations, international politics.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. And I did enjoy it, but I knew where I wanted to be.
Right.
I wanted to get to sea.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do whatever that was going to be.
And then, and how did that road unfold for you? What did the path look like to get you there?
It was relatively straightforward. I was what we would call in today's language, I was a component transfer.
Yep.
Because, I'd been in the reserves for 5 years. I'd done a lot of the officer training that was pretty much standardized between the regular force and the reserves.
Right.
And so, I basically went into the recruiting center in my uniform and said, hey, I want to become a regular force naval officer. What we would have called back in the day Mars, which is just the code for what we had the occupation, the shift driver, basically,
right.
a bridge watchkeeping officer. And I remember the recruiter, he wanted me, because I had a degree in economics, he wanted me to be a supply officer. And I was like, no, I know what a supply officer is. They're great, but that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
So it's just a funny. And then they did a whole handover, gave me credit for some training, but I had some bits missing, and then threw me off to the West Coast, which is where naval officers do all their training in Canada.
Right.
And I joined an ongoing course and did my training.
And how long was that program?
I'd say about 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
I don't remember exactly, but yeah, so in the 12 to 18 month range,
right.
I would say, on the West Coast.
And then finish your training there. So after 18 months, and then where was your first post?
Yeah. So then you join the fleet. It's a little different today. The process is very similar. It's a little more abbreviated because they're better at it, to be honest. The training is better. They use a lot of simulation and stuff like that.
Right.
And you don't have as many fleet assets. Like we had
everything.
We had minesweepers, we had destroyers, we had everything. And there were whole programs dedicated to training, not just us, but, training in general. It's about the same now. So then you go to the fleet. So I would have joined the fleet in, this is like a long time ago, folks. I would have joined the fleet in, I'm thinking spring of 86.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was going on in the world at that time? Was there a heavy Navy presence in one area?
We were peak Cold War at that point, right? So, we were peak Cold War with not a lot of prospects for new capability. So I'm putting it in a current context.
Sure.
Cold War's back, if people weren't paying attention. But Yeah. So, I went to a ship, that at the time was probably, well, 25 years old,
Yeah.
which was pretty standard at the time.
Right.
And a lot of focus on large multi-ship, complex operations.
Mhm.
We had a lot more ships doing a lot more. Anti-submarine warfare was the big focus of the Canadian Navy, primarily
Right.
in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, so it was like you join, you go, and you're gone for probably, depending on what you're doing, 2 or 3 major exercises a year, all of which were probably 6, 8, 10, could be as long as 12 weeks.
Mhm.
The Navy would typically, the East Coast Navy would go south in the winter months.
Yeah. Smart.
Which used to, well, yeah, it's smart for us, but not so. The wives and families weren't necessarily
Sure.
too impressed that we were gone for 3 months at a time.
Yeah.
And then the West Coast would do a similar thing down, work primarily with the Americans, do a lot of work with NATO, transatlantic type stuff. And so that it just kind of grew, and you got your qualifications and you did your thing. And it was all about learning as a junior officer, learning the specific skills you had to learning how the ship operated,
Yep.
learning the crew, all of those basic.
And at that time, would it be common or not so much if, a Navy professional was, advancing their skills, their capability in their courseware that they would receive? Would it be possible for them to be doing that while they were sailing during these exercises?
Oh yeah. We didn't have, what we would call today, we didn't have like remote learning, or that stuff wasn't quite that sophisticated.
Mhm.
It was very much sort of a cookie cutter approach to how we did things. So you did your stuff at sea. You had a whole bunch of requirements you had to do, things you had to get signed off. You had to do a bunch of different, it was all about learning, right?
Mhm.
And there was a lot of while you were under training,
Mhm.
there was a lot of study to do. Then you got qualified, and then you consolidated all that experience. And then you know what it's like in the military. You never really stay in something too long. If you have 12 to 18 months in a job that you know and you understand,
Yeah.
you're A, you're probably getting twitchy,
Mhm.
and B, the organization is looking at where they can put you next.
Yeah.
And so, you just go through you typically, back in the day, we would train people ashore. So you'd get selected for a particular qualification. You'd go ashore for 6 months. Typically 6 months was the cycle.
Yeah.
And then you go back. You might go back to the same ship. You might go do another ship, and then you do a different job and do that for a couple of years, and just sort of build
Right.
more and more experience.
It's pretty cool. So over the course of your career, how many ships were you part of?
Yeah, I was on the lower end, but I'd done a bunch of different things in the reserves with patrol vessels and stuff, things we don't have anymore.
Yeah.
I never kept track of the badges,
Mhm.
because sometimes I was only on a ship for like maybe a month,
And then you
and
move
then you
laterally.
move.
Yeah.
But my, sort of did, my initial training was a couple years, in a ship that's not around anymore. Nipigon was the name of it. Then I got picked to be one of the commissioning crew of what was then the new ships, which are now the old ships
Right. Yeah.
that we're trying to replace.
Right.
A Halifax, which was the lead ship. That was in the early 90s. Did that. So I would typically, I would stay in a ship a little longer than some people.
Right.
And then,
And is the HMCS Halifax, is that still active?
it's the lead ship of the current Halifax class.
Right.
She was laid down in 89, 90. We were in the shipyard. I remember I wasn't there for the keel laying, but I do remember being, there when we took the ship out of the yard, and then we commissioned it in 92. So that makes that ship operationally, it's now coming up on 34 years old.
Wow.
And it was in the water before that.
Right.
So let's call it 35 for a rounding purposes.
And then what's generally the life cycle for a frigate in today's world? Like what would be when the Navy looks at procuring a new vessel, what are they projecting? Are they projecting 30 years plus or?
Well, they're designed. Yeah. So it's a great question. So, 25 plus is a typical, just as a start. You don't typically buy a major asset like that, like a ship or submarine or something, for less than 25 years.
Right.
30 years to 35 would be a broad planning figure, knowing that you're going to have to do a series of life cycling events during the course of
updates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Both on the mechanical structural stuff in order to keep it as a ship, keep it working, and then on the combat side of it to make sure it's still, operationally capable and relevant. So yeah, 35 is a round number. It's not, there's no line in the sand.
Right.
Typically what we do though is, and this gets me onto something, typically what we'll do is we'll plan for 30 to 35 years, and then we hang on to them way too long.
Right.
And even though the organization starts to talk about replacing them, knowing that 35 years is the end of their planned life.
Right.
Shit happens, to put it bluntly, and then they get dragged out longer. So, we're literally rebuilding the early ships of that class. There's 12 of them in Halifax, in Canada, all named after cities.
Right.
And Canada's literally rebuilding them right now. In fact, one of them, I won't mention it by name, but it's a large city in Ontario with the largest building in Canada and the tallest building in Canada. And it is undergoing a refit, which is one of these life extension activities, where the number of hours going into the refit of the vessel is greater than the number of hours that went into building the vessel in the first place.
Oh boy.
So obviously there's a message. We buy stuff for 30 to 35 years, which is probably not a good idea in the first place. And then we hang on to stuff way too long and try to make it last 40 or 50 years because we're unable to plan things properly. But that's not what you asked me, Randy. Sorry. That was just me going off on a bit of a tangent.
It opens up a whole series of questions that I want to dive into, but let's back up just a little bit. So looking back at your career, lots of, peaks and valleys, lots of good stuff to be proud of. Is there one post or one job detail that you had for quite some time that when you kind of reflect on your career, like, that it gave you, job satisfaction, something you're really proud of, something that you would, you'd revisit again? Yeah,
excellent. So in the ship driving business in the Navy, they're now called naval warfare officers. So if any of your viewers or listeners are, wondering what the hell I did for a living, they're now called naval warfare officers, NWOs. Basically, you go from being a bridge officer where you're 20 something years old and you're getting a license to drive the ship around, which is pretty cool in and of itself.
Yes.
Up to and including command of the vessel, which is typically a 15 to 20 year journey to get there with a whole bunch of steps in the way which I know you're trying to pull it out of me, but I'm trying to stay out of the weeds here. And then you have command of a ship, and then that allows you to then do other things, command a group of ships, do other stuff as you go on. In terms of that early, command stream, command path, ultimately having command is probably the most satisfying, rewarding, and challenging thing that you do. Right? It is both an incredible honor and an enormous responsibility.
Yeah, sure.
But leading up to that, you can do some really cool things. And I would say, I had a bunch of those. The commissioning crew of the new class of ship was really cool. That was an amazing experience. I did that. I was part of that for 3 years, and then I changed jobs and stayed. So I was with that ship for almost 6 years doing different jobs.
Yeah.
And including a deployment to the Adriatic and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was amazing and defining. And then you build on it and build on it, build on it. But I would think one of the things that probably really kind of woke me up to how the ship really functioned and how it all came together was as the executive officer. So that's the second in command.
Yep.
Of one of our destroyers. At the time, it was HMCS Iroquois. Again, destroyers are no longer with us, sadly. On a NATO deployment. So we were flagship for the NATO squadron. So NATO has a bunch of standing forces in different air, army, and Navy domains.
Yep.
And so it was Canada's turn to not only contribute a ship to the standing naval force, but to have the flag officer, so an admiral that basically commanded all of this NATO force. And so the flag officer needs a place to be, so Canada provides a ship. And so we were this ship. So I was the second in command of the ship. So it was a really, high intensity preparation, pre-deployment, deployment, and then you got to see everything because now you're sailing with a admiral on board and all of his staff, and you're starting to see how everything kind of comes together. Learning how to be a commanding officer. I worked for an amazing captain who I had sailed with previously in a different job. And he was an incredible mentor. Guy grew up in the ranks, was a NCM, came up as a sailor and, rose to the rank. He was a four-ring captain, so a Navy captain in command.
Right. And,
he was a friend. He was a mentor. He was an incredible officer. He was a war fighter, one of those guys.
Yeah.
And he was a nice guy. Like sometimes, people can be assholes. He was not an asshole.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from him.
Good.
And so that when I reflect on, kind of bridging, that was probably mid-career.
Yeah.
So, I'd been at this now for 13, 14 years, I guess, to get there.
Right on.
And then you kind of fast forward and you start to think, okay, what could I do?
Yeah. That's incredible. 13 years.
So it was a pivotal
service,
moment. Yeah. It was a really important moment. And I started to see dots connecting as I was looking beyond. I mean, of course, I didn't have command at that point. I didn't even know if I was going to get selected for command.
Right.
But, you start to see command for what it really is and the people component of it and just the leadership aspects of it and all of those things that just it all resonated, I guess, and it all kind of gelled together.
And at that time, so you're 13, 14 years into your career, you're second in command of a major vessel in a NATO presence. How many, for viewers that maybe are not aware, like how many people would it take to keep that, if they're all operational, to keep that vessel up and running and operationally ready? Like how many people are we talking about here?
Yeah. So, your average, like a frigate or destroyer, in those configurations, the crews are getting smaller these days, but you're in the 250 to 300 range in that ship.
Right.
You're, at the crew of a Halifax class frigate right now is about 220, 225.
Right.
They can carry more, gets crowded and a bit uncomfortable, but they can do it.
Yeah.
And that includes the aircraft, by the way. Of course, carry that back then we were carrying the Sea King, now we carry the Cyclone. But that air detachment is about 30 some people who then integrate completely into the crew. So you have to include that in the numbers. So we were running probably around 260 at the time. It's a long answer, but I want to give the context to the answer.
Yeah.
And we had a bunch of staff on board too. So I don't know. We were probably, I'd say the cooks were cooking 1,200 meals a day is probably my guess.
Yep.
I would have known right off the top of my head back in the day, but now it escapes me.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's just give people context of how many people it takes to operate something like that. It's a pretty big responsibility.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, and everybody's, got their different things. Some people are running the machinery. Some people are running the aircraft. Some people are manning the operations, all the sensors and the weapons. And we've got one of the oldest trades in the business are the bosuns who keep things working on the upper decks and look after the boats. And you've got all your supplies and all your, like I said, the meals. I mean, you're cooking, you have 300 people embarked on board and you're cooking 4 meals a day. So there's the math.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And the galley crew's probably only 6 or 7 people.
Right.
So,
pretty impressive. When you look back at, the transitions between, decades to decades. So you saw a lot of ebb and flow with the Navy as vessels were being decommissioned, and capabilities now being challenged. Were there decisions made during your career with the Navy that, you pushed back and you said, hey, this is either, bad idea or, we got to put some things in place to ensure that our Navy is a legitimate fighting force?
Yeah, not in the mid, I was, I think part of the reason, so I have to acknowledge the courage of my predecessors to have put up with me. Okay. And I mean that quite honestly, because it was a bit of an investment.
Yeah.
I'm not a status quo kind of guy. I ask a lot of questions. I can be a bit disruptive, positively disruptive. I would argue positively disruptive. And that carried through. But there's a moment at which that stuff's not welcome, right?
Right.
And you get to a point where you're actually able to start making decisions that are able to impact not just the people around you. I mean, every decision you make when you're in a leadership position is going to impact people.
Yes.
I'm getting to your question. Believe me, I didn't forget it. I was never, there's a point at which you don't really understand what the grown-ups, if I can put it that way, are dealing with.
Right.
You just know what you're dealing with in your particular domain.
Yeah.
And like I said, that moment where I started to see things a little bigger, I could see beyond my own ship. I could see there were no decisions that I would say I would have been even privately critical of. I mean, maybe some silly little policy decisions, but that didn't matter. In terms of the big picture stuff, it's not until you start to get involved in actually running the institution as a big, complex organization where you start to think, okay, not sure that was the right choice. But I've come to reflect on this, that everybody, for the most part, but let's be generous and say 98, 99% of people in these positions that they're in are actually trying to do the best they can in their circumstance, right?
That's right?
And so you can judge the circumstance, you can judge the wisdom of the decision in the context of what you're facing today. So if a decision made 15 years ago is impacting where you are today, that's fair, but there's no point getting hung up on it because there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
But it is totally unfair and unreasonable to judge the decision in the moment of the decision, especially in retrospect. Right.
Yeah.
So I learned, I did learn that you got to be really careful. The decisions you make, the more responsibility you have, the more impact those decisions have on the organization. You got to be really, really careful that you're not just reacting to a today problem, and that you understand the implications of tomorrow. And that if you're not going to be around tomorrow, when those implications come into effect, you better make sure the people around you who are going to be there tomorrow understand, hey guys, I realize you may not like this decision right now, but I'm telling you, this is what we have to do today, and I'm going to be gone in 3 years or 5 years or whatever. And you're going to own this, Randy. And you need to understand why we're making this decision now, so that you can basically carry that forward, and then you make whatever decision you have to make. I didn't answer your question. I was in no position to judge the decisions of the people above me.
Right.
Because I didn't understand what they were dealing with. At the time, I probably thought I was smarter, but I'm not sure I was.
Yeah.
You
Sure.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a long circular discussion here, but perspective is a really important thing. Right?
Sure.
Context matters.
The context is everything.
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
I mean, the circumstance that we're living in right now is based on the decisions that we made yesterday, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But how do we educate the future of the Canadian Armed Forces by saying, institutionally, there's a lot of studies that support what we put into effect today. We may not see the fruits of those labors for a decade, right? So institutionally, it's difficult for folks that might be in the position to make a very, important decision right now with the information that they have without the forethought of how is this going to affect 10 years from now. It's difficult because oftentimes we get caught up in, well, what we're doing is the most important thing to us. But so too, there's 10 other people working on something that's the most important thing to them.
Right. And they are important.
They are.
It's all important. And it's a matter of, so this goes back to what I was saying. When you start to understand how all the pieces fit together, you can actually be more useful to your organization.
Sure.
Because you're not just, I'm going to assume you're going to be as good as you can be. You're going to be as excellent as you can be at the thing that you're doing.
Right.
But if you don't understand how that fits into the other pieces, then you're not necessarily being as useful as you can be.
Right.
So I agree with you. That's the point. So let me give you an example. You were asking, you're trying to tease out some career things here. So after this amazing second in command experience that I described, I got promoted, I got put on the track. Okay, fine. We're going to put you in the pre-command thing. I got sent to Ottawa for the first time, which, for a lot of people is kind of like, oh my God, you're leaving the waterfront or whatever. It was an incredible opportunity for me. Personally, Ottawa's a great city, as you know. I came here with my family. But I learned some really important stuff. And that was my first exposure to the sausage making that is national defense headquarters and everything else.
Right.
And I was really lucky. I got to work in a technical area where I was an expert in what we call in the business above water warfare or air defense. So guns, missiles, radars, electronic warfare, all that kind of stuff. So I was running a team that we were doing procurement, for lack of a better term. And so running all these projects and everything. And it was fascinating because you made a really good point about not seeing the fruits of your labors. I realized very early, it was humbling. I had a learning curve. I had some great people around me. Some of the guys working with, they say for me only because I was their boss, but they were smarter than me and they knew what the hell they were doing. They'd been there. I learned, okay, we're here to leave the place in better shape than we found it.
Right.
And I learned that from my father. Always leave the campsite in better shape than you found it. Right. So that was kind of my mantra while I was there. Learn, make a positive difference, and realize that, man, some of this stuff I was working on in 2001 is in the fleet now.
Cool.
Yeah. So, okay, that's great. But I knew I wasn't necessarily going to touch it or feel it or see it. But it's kind of this, you're in this long game. And that's hard. It's hard. It's hard for individuals to see that. It's hard for the institution.
Yeah.
It's also hard to build competence. How do you build the ability to do that stuff? People, it's not what they necessarily signed up to do.
Right.
How are they motivated to do it anyway? So that was another contributor to this lifelong or career-long series of learning points where I realized, you know what? It is bigger than I thought. And there's a lot more going on. And that this stuff is long. This is a long game. Like you're in this for decades kind of thing. Not individually necessarily, but the organization.
Yeah, the institution is.
Yeah.
And with all your time in leadership roles, providing mentorship to, the next generation, and also receiving, by the sounds of it, some pretty good mentorship along the way. Looking back at it, is there any deficiencies that you recognize that we could be just a little bit more efficient as an institution to get the desired effect? Maybe not necessarily sooner, because we typically, that's generally how we are as humans. We want that thing and we want it 10 minutes ago. But how would you say, or what advice would you give in terms of those folks that are in those positions now to make wise decisions for the betterment of the institution 10 years from now? Is there a way to make it a little bit more efficient? Is there things that we could either cut away or put at maybe a lower priority rate to get the desired effect sooner?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I thought when you were starting to frame the question, I thought you were going to go a different route. So now I got to I was anticipating your question, which you should never do. So, what I'll offer while I'm formulating my answer to your other question is, there's sort of two things that I think of is, I think we have a couple of structural or cultural biases. One, it's the we know better bias. Okay, the organization, there's this balance point between cultivating the imagination and the innovation of the junior people in the organization,
like encouraging them to be curious and
exactly
have ambition,
right? Understand what's going on, why things fit, these stuff you and I have been talking about. How do all the pieces fit together? How do you make them fit together better, smarter, faster, harder, deadlier, whatever it is you're trying to achieve? But actually encouraging and inculcating that curiosity and rewarding it. Well, you're younger than me, but that's fine. I mean, we grew up in an organization where, curiosity was not rewarded.
Yeah.
In fact, it was punished.
Yeah.
In many respects.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge advocate for curiosity. And then the other thing I would say is that we're not a particularly imaginative organization. We tend to be, and for good reason. I'm not shitting on the organization, but as you rise higher in it and you start to look at it and you realize, you know what we could be doing. I think a lot of problems that either we think we need to solve as a priority or that we need to solve as a priority, and they're not always the same thing.
No,
that goes to your question.
Yes.
We tend to look for solutions in what we're comfortable with. It's the classic, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, every problem is a nail, right? And we need to be more imaginative. So that sense of imagination and that in cultivating that sense of curiosity, because, I think, again, I come back to pivotal moments in my career where I realized I was not the smartest person in the room. And that there were people there with incredible competencies, and you have to rely on people's competencies as experts, right? But then you realize, well, you know what, this problem, there's layers to this problem. It's complicated. Yeah. And as you get higher up, you kind of have to look at it and say, okay, I got to see all the pieces. I can't be distracted by a single piece. And
do you think, and with that follow-up question would be, do you think in some cases a clear understanding of the culture and a clear purpose would help keep folks more dialed into the problem at hand? Where I'm going with that is a Navy fighting force, for example, in terminology and in motivations, we're trying to make, a defense capability as robust as we possibly can. Do you feel that sometimes distractions are, inherently, they come to the surface based on institutional friction points, that we lose sight of the fact that, hey, we have an obligation to defend our nation. We have an obligation to be the most badass Navy we can possibly be. And if there's a capability that's missing, or if there's a group of people that need to be trained a certain way to be as badass as you possibly can, let's fill that gap, as opposed to, you know, the issues at hand that maybe are not so important in terms of the sovereignty of this country, and then making a true war fighting capability within the Navy.
Yeah, no, I'm picking up on what I think you're getting at. So let me offer you two perspectives. So organizational culture is an individual responsibility and a collective responsibility. Individuals can fuck it up just by being assholes or not focusing on the right things. But they can also fix it if they're in the right position to fix it. But the culture of a watch on deck or a section in a ship or a squad, a platoon, whatever, is pretty much 90% controlled by the behavior and attitude of the leaders of that small group.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep.
And they don't operate in a complete bubble, but they kind of do. Yes, the organizational culture of the broader structure has an impact. But what I'm trying to say two things. Individual leaders own this, and they can make it or break it. But I recognize that they are often constrained by the broader parameters, attitudes, and I'll call it policy and political influences of the bigger culture.
Right.
That is not an excuse, however, for good leadership at the tactical level.
Yeah.
But that then puts the onus on the individuals operating at the strategic and institutional level to remind each other, themselves, of their collective responsibility for the institution. We have lost our way. Okay, I'll be blunt here. We have lost our way for a variety of reasons, and the forensics of this, somebody could write a book. Somebody's a lot smarter than I am, and maybe 100 people would buy it. But the point is, we are where we are.
Yep.
This is a very complicated equation. I remember using this description one day, and people thought it was kind of goofy. But if you think of the fighting organization, call it Canadian Armed Forces and all of its constituent elements, as a complicated equation, okay, with multiple variables. All your math fans in your audience may appreciate this. We tend to focus on a single variable at a time. So it could be at this particular moment in time, it's all about inclusiveness. Okay. Right. So that variable, however that's represented in the equation, becomes the sole focus of our effort, our energy, everything we're doing, at the exclusion of the other 17 variables in the equation.
Right.
And then we get in there and we tweak this and turn that and change this and pull this lever and put this policy in place. And then we kind of close the book and move on. And we don't realize that there are implications on all those other things.
Right.
And then we wake up, whatever. Pick a period of time. We wake up 3-5 years later.
Yep.
And all of a sudden we go, what the hell happened, man? Like the equation doesn't balance anymore.
Right.
And you try to go back and you try to, well, which was it? And then you point, well, it was, remember that day we did this and we did that. It's not that simple.
Yep.
It is the result of decades of fucking around with the different variables and not realizing the implications of every one of those, what appear at the time to be important, appropriate, politically motivated, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Financially driven.
Yeah.
You look at the bulk of our careers was spent in constraint. And so you're always trying to squeeze. There's opposed to trying to grow.
Yeah.
And so that's a totally different mindset.
Right.
And so we have created an environment of our own making, and we've got to reset this, because I genuinely believe, I'm passionate about this. I speak about this whenever I get a chance. We are in an incredibly dangerous world right now.
Agreed.
We need an institution that can actually do what we're paying it to do. I don't believe it's the fault of individuals in the organization. You can't blame somebody who's coming in off the street and being trained for not understanding what it is, they're supposed to be doing or anything like that.
I would push back just a little bit. I would say there is an onus on the individual to do their own research and know what they're getting into, and have a righteous intent to be part of an institution that has a clear vision. There's an onus on the individual, I think. And there's a partial to that where leadership positions need to guide that and mentor that.
Yeah. I buy that. And if they're not there, then we need to weed them out.
Yes, exactly. And the distraction of, and it's a fact, like the DEI movement over the last 5, 6, 7 years has gone too far, and it's a distraction from creating a fighting force that has the capability to protect this country.
Yeah, you can't have one. I said it the other day, and I agree with you, Randy. I agree completely.
And I would add to that just one piece where, if policies are created because of the behaviors of one or two people, that's a problem. If we get rid of these one or two bad apples, which can have an influence on, the production and the overall productivity of a subsection that is part of a greater institution, then get rid of them, rather than creating a policy or putting something in place that is so constrictive to actually evolving and getting better as an institution. Take that one or two small group of individuals and say, listen, man, like, thanks for your service, but you're not doing anything productive to the organization. You have to go, rather than creating a policy that affects we'll say 90%.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was struck as I was a relatively junior four-ringer, which to some of your audience may seem like a ridiculous thing to say as a junior four-ringer.
Well, we all started somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I had the privilege of sitting in some rooms that I never thought I'd be invited to sit in, so that I could, help analyze and shape offline, behind closed doors, some of the things that were going on. And I remember vividly a conversation. I won't mention any names because that's unfair.
Sure.
But it was a group of serving general and flag officers. And a particular officer was speaking on an experience, a combat experience. And the question came from the audience, who were his peers. Do you have any regrets in a particular context? And this officer, who I know, he's a friend of mine, he said, he paused for a moment and he looked up and he thought, and he said, yeah. And everybody kind of went, okay, this will be good.
Yeah.
We have to be better at firing people. And by that he meant, and he went out, he didn't, again, very respectful, no names. He didn't mention any names, but what he was saying was, we carry people too much. And his point was, there are things that people can do in the organization to help the broader organization. However, when you boil it all down, the organization is there to fight. And if they can't deliver on the fight, then they're not the right person for the job. And we have to get rid of them. And again, rookie four-ringer, that had a real impression on me. And I was like, wow, okay, this is pretty powerful stuff. And to go back to your comment, I agree with you completely. Yes, individuals do bear an enormous responsibility in that regard. But it's the institution's responsibility to inculcate them and make sure they measure up.
Agreed.
Okay.
That's right.
I was speaking in a public thing a month or so ago, And somebody asked me a similar question, and I made the distinction, and I think it's relevant to our conversation right now. I said, the purpose of the organization is to fight.
Yes.
The values of the organization are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
yeah.
and those are important. But when the values of the organization start to creep into and take control of the purpose of the organization, then you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we are. That's why I say, I think we've lost our way. I think there's nothing wrong with having values in your organization. We can debate whether that's the right one or this one or that one. That's not the friggin' point.
That's right.
The friggin' point is those describe who you are.
Yes.
They don't describe what you do.
That's the difference. It's words on a paper or a placard that you see in a wall. It's not the behavior that is consistent of the individual.
And I think that is, the essence for your viewers and listeners. I think that's the essence of why where we're at this. It's a tension, and we've crossed. There's a tipping point here, and we've crossed the tipping point where we're losing sight of the purpose of the institution at the expense of the values of the institution. And I'm trying to, I'm trying to keep it as high level as possible. Because as soon as you talk about an example, then people can pile on one side of the example or the other. Oh yeah, this one, that one, and but if we, and I think that's the essence of the problem.
Yeah, I agree. The comment that sometimes follows when, somebody that's got some intelligence, they recognize that there's a potential issue and here's a solution to right that issue. And then it's the naysayers or the yeah, but guy, yeah, but what? We recognize this is a legitimate issue. Everybody in this room agrees. Yeah. Okay. Here's a solution to fix this. Yeah, but what? It's either, what are the risks associated or what's it going to cost that's associated? Well, we're missing sight of what is it that we're trying to achieve and how do we get there? And as a collective, how do we get there?
And this is where, this is an example of the broader principle of some things are worth fighting for, some things are worth killing for, some things are worth dying for. And when you lose sight of what those things are, back to your point about the yeah buts, I call them the knights of no, that the people who are our organization. It's really funny, At the tactical level, you're an expert in this. You honestly, I have enormous respect. We're in the same organization, but we just had different paths.
Yep.
At the tactical level, we understand risk, we take risk, we manage it, we deal with it, we do this, we're decisive, we do all of this stuff. If there's a problem, we figure out a way around it. Somebody says, well, yeah, but what about that's a hazard or the bad guys are, you come up with a plan.
Yeah.
You don't go, oh, well, fuck, it's too hard.
Yep.
You don't understand, Randy. You can't take that position.
Yep.
You just don't understand.
Yep.
No, I got to get it done.
Yeah.
And as and this is something I observed my whole career, as people moved up in the organization, they all were connected to their roots, but the relevance of that became really tenuous.
Yeah.
Like they kind of lost sight of it.
Yeah.
And it's not about doing the person's job who's 5 levels below you in the organization. That's not it. Hang on a second. We are trained to understand risk, take risk, do dangerous things, not just for the shits and giggles of it, but because we have to.
Right.
And we got a job to do. We got a mission to execute, all these kinds of things. And then we get up into this kind of, it's ambiguous, complicated, structural, organizational issues. I hate the word political because it's just so dismissive.
Yeah.
But even in the culture of the organization, there's politics.
Yes.
Like
there is.
Not elected official politics, just the politics of an organization. And then people they become either distracted by that, they become obstructed by that, they become intimidated by it, whatever.
Or actively disengaged because of it, and they end up just coasting.
And so, look, there are things I did which were intentionally provocative, intentionally to throw people off their comfort
Yeah, it's good.
place
Yeah.
and start thinking differently and behaving differently, in order to get people to realize, look, you can't get where we need to be by just embracing status quo
Right.
and doing things.
Yeah.
There are times when you have to break stuff.
Yes.
And unfortunately, you know, the Knights of No, the yeah buts, they have too much sway. Everybody gets an opinion on why not to do something,
Right.
as opposed to rallying together in order to do something.
Yeah.
Which you would never see at the tactical level in whatever environment you're in.
Yeah.
It's funny. There's something going on. I don't know if it's something in the coffee or what, but there's something that happens.
There's something definitely going on. I mean, I've got, by choice, you know, I look at this water bottle that's half full. It's optimistic by choice. We've got to be okay with making mistakes. We got to be okay with taking risks and trying things. And if it doesn't work out, rather than trying to throw somebody under the bus and say, "Oh man, what a terrible decision." It's like, well, what do we learn from that decision? And are we still, you know, fighting towards that common goal and that common purpose? And maybe that's oversimplifying it, but at the end of the day, listen, if we are open to listen to somebody's suggestion on how to crack this nut and create a solution to the problem, that's a good thing. You know, humility. And if we are, you know, okay with somebody else's idea might be the most optimal idea to put forward, be okay with at least, you know, taking a chance. And then the last one is perfect doesn't exist. So if we're waiting for the perfect time or the perfect set of circumstances, how much waiting are we going to do before we actually do something about it?
So back in 2016, I was able to start working with Kydex, and the reason I wanted to start working with Kydex was because I was a left-handed shooter. Finding left-handed gear was extremely hard, so I just put two and two together and started working with Kydex, making left-handed holsters for myself. From there, quote-unquote, refined my process. Started making gear for buddies that were cops in military, and it literally snowballed from there.
Everything that we do is handmade by shooters for shooters, and you know there's a lot of other Kydex companies out there, and you know they are also, you know, for shooters by shooters. But we take the time and we care about what we do, and I think that shows in our products.
Like working here, this is our home. We brought it from home and we created a home. Our kids have worked here, so this is our home.
I used to use that similar language as I was moving up and was in a place where people actually were interested in what I had to say. And I would make the distinction between perfection and excellence.
Mm.
Excellence is doing the absolute best you can in the circumstances you're facing.
Good.
Perfection is unrealistic.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, to your point.
Yeah.
And if you keep waiting for or trying to orchestrate the perfect solution, changing the variables, changing this, changing that, you're never going to get there.
No.
Which is why it's not the only reason, but it is a big contributor to why Everything takes longer than it should.
Yep.
The institution is relatively indecisive in the grand scheme of things.
Yep.
Because it's always, well, what about this? And what about that?
Yeah.
And yeah, but I like it, you know,
yeah.
or, well, hang on a second. Have you considered this and this? It is a difference between considering the possible risks of breaching
Of course.
a building.
Yeah. Calculated risk is intelligent, you know,
Correct.
but
Exactly.
but saying no,
But avoiding risk
right.
entirely,
Yeah.
that's unrealistic. And then there's different strategies. I used to joke, a really good friend of mine, you know, we came up together, we worked together several times. I mean, and I would always joke with people. I said, well, yeah, we have different strategies. He will charge into the village at dawn with the, you know, the flags flying and the trumpets blaring, and that's it. I'm coming in and just pummel the village. I'll sneak into the village at night and slit every third throat. We may achieve the exact same outcome,
right.
but now it's just a different approach,
right.
different strategy, depends on the circumstances
right.
and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah.
The frontal assault is effective.
Yeah.
But back to your point, you got to understand the risks of a frontal assault.
That's right. Context.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Tell us if you're. I mean, obviously you speak about whatever you're comfortable with. But what was your experience like in Ottawa as the vice chief of defense staff, 2016-17 timeframe? Yeah.
So I mean, I was I'd been sitting around the big tables for a while, and I was, I think, motivated and concerned, if that makes sense.
What were your concerns at that time?
Yeah, the concerns were, you know, this was before the days of wanting to spend a whole bunch more money on the institution, but we had, you know, we were in the post-Afghanistan period, so we'd been out now for a few years at this point. There were some promising programs coming down the pipe. We were starting to see some retention issues, and we were getting squeezed by the machinery of government. Okay, so I think, you know, there had been a general sense of a bit of a hall pass mentality when it came to Afghanistan. And then, okay, you're out now. It's time to get you boys back in the box and start, you know, getting things under control in many respects, right? So that was. And
what do you think at that level? What do you think some of the concerns are? Like, when, you know, the analogy that you're using, you know, putting the Canadian forces back in the box and saying, okay, let's slow down here. What do you think is the motivating factor? Is it generally financially driven? Yeah, primarily. It's not exclusively. Right. That would be an overly simplistic answer, but it is resource driven. I mean, look, the armed forces is a huge. If you're in the business of managing the government accounts, it's a cost center, right? Is what the business people would say. Yeah, money in, money out. Yeah. Well, it's in their minds, it's money in. It's just they don't see much out of it. Right. You know, there's generally an attitude of getting embroiled in conflicts that don't have an end to them. What's the implication of that from a national policy perspective? I'm just giving you the different views out there. The insatiable appetite for money. And there was an issue here of influence and power, where the armed forces had, for understandable reasons, because we had troops in combat, people were getting killed. Yes. We had what in the minds of many was a disproportionate or inappropriate level of access and influence to the key decision makers in government. Really? And so these are all part of, you know, kind of a post-Afghanistan reset, if you want to put it that way. Yeah.
And you just start to see how it manifests itself in terms of how you squeeze the program. The back, in that time frame, we had some of the same ambition that you're seeing today. Now, Christ, is almost 10 years later.
Yeah.
But absent the resources that are being committed to the armed forces.
Man, that's got to be tough conversations to have when you got motivated folks with great ideas and they can see, potentially they've got foresight of the potential 5 or 10 years down the road of where we could be involved as a Canadian entity. And then stifling that motivation because there's a lack of resources.
Yeah, it was soul sucking, to be quite honest. It was really, and you do everything you absolutely can, recognizing that at the end of the day, those of us who were, and for the most part, most people were, they were there because they wanted to be, right? They really wanted to try and make an impact and back to what we were talking, leave their campsite in better shape than they found it, right? Yeah. And so, but it's hard. It is hard. It's still hard today. It's just a different set of problems.
Right.
But still trying to figure out, okay, who do we want to be? The fundamental essence of this. And how much can you shave an ice cube before it's no longer an ice cube? And now we got to rebuild it all. And this is part of the problem, is that the challenges the institution are facing now are a direct result of some of those decisions that had to be made over the preceding 3 or 4 decades.
Right.
Is why I say I'm on the public record as saying we're not going to fix these problems overnight.
No.
And we just need to be very careful. And there's 2 components to that. There's a qualitative component, which is what you were getting at a little while ago with respect to what is the purpose of the institution? What are we here to do? We're here to fight. Then that has to be the primary focus of the organization. Right. The rest of this stuff is really important. I'm not diminishing it, but it doesn't define, the job we have to do here.
That's right.
And there's I'm encouraged that I think there's been a bit of a shift, not just in the mindset of political leadership, the Canadians, I'm not, it depends how you ask people a question, what answer you get. But I think there is a growing sense of, okay, we are in a tough place and we need to sort our shit out.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we need to do better. We need to level up for sure.
I'm not sure, and I'm concerned how much patience people will have for that and how much they actually understand the implications of this. Whether they're numb to numbers when you start throwing 100 billion here and 100 billion there.
Yeah.
Are they numb to references to $100 billion? I don't know. But, this is it's a nice problem to have, but it's still a real problem because
it is a real problem.
No matter of money is going to fix those underlying structural issues, which are central to the defining raison d'etre of the organization.
Yeah.
And all of those.
But I do think a more responsible allocation of funds would motivate the folks that are in uniform and see those positive changes. Like, I'll be a little bit critical, but sending another billion or multi-million dollars to a foreign country because of the crisis that they're in, when those set of funds can be allocated more directly to the Canadian Armed Forces for folks that are in the military, that would incentivize them and motivate them to A, want to stay in, and B, ask questions. Well, where's this money going? What is the training going to look like? What is the procurement of kit and equipment going to look like? I do believe that money doesn't fix all problems, but it does put a little bit of motivation and wind in the sails for folks that are hanging on.
It shows people that there's a genuine commitment and it's not just empty words.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. And it is, I believe it is an embarrassment as a country that we not only emptied our own shelves, but that we haven't figured out how to refill our own shelves, and let alone how to rebuild some of these new capabilities that
Yeah.
we should have had all a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no point in lamenting,
Sure.
yesterday's problem.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that.
I got a question for you. Your opinion, for the last 10 years, Canada at all levels, citizens, folks in uniform, political level, very reactive, not as proactive with things that we could be more proactive with. What's your opinion on why do you think culturally Canadians in general are so reactive? Why are we not more proactive when we see the potential that, man, there's a ton of talent in this country. There is a ton of talent from coast to coast, a lot of smart people, a lot of resources. We have a lot here in Canada. Why is it that we as a nation, citizens, folks in uniform and at the political level tend to be so reactive? Why is it that we're not more proactive with taking a stance and showing the world what we're capable of?
Yeah, Randy, it's an awesome question, and I'm going to do my best. I don't have a perfect answer. I think part of our problem is we don't have a national ambition. And people, I think even if you'd ask, depending on who you asked, they would see the word ambition as a bad thing. And it's not.
No.
It's not.
No, it's not.
We lack a sense of ambition. We lack a sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
So now you don't know who you are. You don't know who you want to be, if we can frame it that way.
Sure.
We define ourselves by who we're not, which is not the right start point
No.
of the conversation. And this lack of ambition, it goes back to what you said earlier about the yeah buts. We are culturally constrained. We constrain ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like until recently, you go to an event where the national anthem plays, nobody sings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, fine. But like that there's this, our pride, it's a passive pride.
Mm.
It's there when we need it and as a defensive thing if you attack it.
Yeah.
But it's not overtly there.
Yeah.
And this has been part of our identity. We don't wear our identity on, yes, the military wear our identity on our sleeves as a flag, but we don't wear it as an underlying symbol of who we are and why we're proud. And
I agree.
So these things are missing from our society.
Yeah.
And they're therefore hard to activate. And look at the political landscape right now. I'm going to get into it, but the only reason why there's been an uptick in what I would call apparent patriotism, because I don't know whether it's real or it's just a reactive patriotism to your point, is because we felt our identity being threatened because of the rhetoric that was coming out of south of the border.
I think I think two parts to that. One, there are a lot of Canadians who are proud Canadians, and they're also for years have been very proud with the relationship they've had with the Americans. So now they feel insulted when, the president of the United States says, basically we're cutting off the lines of what we had as a healthy relationship. So some of those Canadians are like, wait a minute, we've been there with you through thick and thin since World War I.
Spilled blood together. And this is how you're going to treat us. So I think some of those Canadians, that's where they feel the pride, but also a little bit slighted. And they hurt.
Yeah, right.
And I think it's genuine.
I do too, rightfully so, and I'm with them on that. And then there are other portion of society that, when it's convenient, they will push back and they will tout their patriotism because it's convenient or because they get a like on social media or whatever. It's like, do you really believe that, or are you just being difficult for the sake of being difficult? I think there's two parts of the society where, actually maybe three, where the immigrants that come from Canada, they see an opportunity for themselves and their families. They're not true Canadians yet, but they see the potential of what it is that they.
Yeah, but they can be excited about the potential and they can embrace the potential. The problem is we collectively, we don't know we can't articulate the potential. This goes back to there's an ambition.
Yeah.
Who do we want to be? Right. And I think you hit on something. We have been a protectorate of somebody else for our entire history. Mm-hmm. Okay. You look at all right, post First Nations. All right. So and I hate this term, when the colonial powers arrived.
Right.
So when the French and the English showed up, and it was like, okay, we were either a French colony or we were an English colony. They fought it out and decided, okay, now we're going to be an English colony, but we're going to recognize our French heritage, which is great. And I'll go forward. Then we were like the British, and then we transitioned from that in the 20th century. Then we basically became a protectorate of the United States, mm-hmm. and that we lived that for the better part of 70 plus years.
Yep.
Stood on our own 2 feet, did amazing things during the war and in the latter half of the 20th century. And then we just got comfortable. As hurtful as this stuff is today, I actually think it's healthy because it's forced us. Mm. I say this to people all the time. I don't care whether it's at the macro level like we're discussing now, or as it relates to a particular high-profile procurement about airplanes. I said, we're forcing ourselves to have conversations that we haven't had.
Agreed.
And you know what? Really good things come from really hard conversations.
Agreed.
And so I'm with you. I don't know exactly what the recipe is, mm-hmm. but I know that it's about us embracing who we are on a full-time basis, not a part-time basis.
That's right.
You can't just be
that's it.
A transactional or performative Canadian.
Yeah. You
got to be all in.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, we got some tough problems to solve, but our tough problems are really nice, tough problems to have compared to some of the places that you and I have been in our lives.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of Canadians realize how lucky and how lucky we are, unless you've actually traveled a little bit and you had some exposure to other cultures and other parts of the world. You kind of get, blinded is maybe not the right word, but, falsified sense of security because it is comfortable. It is relatively easy. People can bitch and complain about taxes, which are, legit for sure. My point though is, in comparatively speaking, some other nations that are dealing with some heinous stuff right now. It's, in hindsight, we can do better, and we're doing all right, Canada.
We are. But I think to the premise of your previous comment there a few minutes ago, we have enormous potential.
Yes,
we do.
Yeah,
human potential, resource potential.
Yep.
Like we're just, but sometimes we just can't get out of our own way.
Yeah,
we're so preoccupied with internal squabbling.
Yeah,
which I think sadly is a function of how lucky we really are.
Mm.
If our biggest problems are the ones that we squabble over internally, then some people could legitimately argue that, well, one of two things: either you don't understand what real problems are, or you're focused on the wrong problems.
Sure.
I think we're on the cusp of we're focusing on the wrong problems sometimes, and we need to really, pull up our socks. Stupid throwaway term, stand on our own 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this has to do with, defining who we are. Mm-hmm. So in the same context of, the armed forces is defined by, it is there to fight, and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. That's important,
right.
Of varying degrees of importance.
Yes.
But it's a fighting organization. Everything we do should be enabling the war fighting.
It says it right in the title, Canadian Armed Forces.
Right. Some people would argue that, but that's fine. To be honest, they're entitled to their opinion, but they don't know what they're talking about. And the second, so on a macro layer now, or a macro level, the same thing applies to Canada. You know, like what is the definition of, you know, what we're here to do?
Right.
If we're here to just simply exist and carve out the best we can, well, that's kind of a fairly ambiguous and fairly mediocre ambition as a country. You know, we can be more, we need to be more, and we need to be, you know, and it comes back to some of the same things we've been talking about at the individual and organizational level. We have to be prepared to take more risk.
Yes.
We have to be prepared to make mistakes.
Be uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sweat.
Work
hard.
Bingo. Exactly.
Yeah.
And not everything we do is going to work.
No.
But we can't be focused on the you know, overanalyzing the negative side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we do post action all the time.
Yeah.
But we learn from it. You do it. It's ingrained in our DNA. It's part of the learning process. You do something. You make mistakes. You learn from those mistakes and you move on.
Yeah.
You don't obsess over the mistakes. You don't turn the whole organization around itself on those mistakes.
Agreed.
Which is kind of the, you know, we get wrapped up in that.
Yeah. Sometimes it happens a little too much. Yeah. So, the other question I want to ask. So back at your time as the vice, before you left the military, how much interaction would you have had with the Minister of National Defense at that level?
Well, a lot. I mean, even as the head of the Navy before that, and then as the deputy head of the Navy, yeah. I mean, you're dealing with the minister's office. I mean, daily.
Yeah,
maybe,
okay.
You know, depending on a lot of it was issues driven. It may shock some of your viewers to know that, sadly, the organization is driven by day-to-day issues more than it is by delivering on a strategy.
Yeah.
Trying to deliver a strategy
Yeah.
in the face of day-to-day crises.
Right.
And
that answers a question that I had in the queue, which was like, how much pressure are they under on a consistent basis as the Minister of National Defense, who's making some very powerful decisions? How much pressure are they on, and how far forward are they thinking, or is it day to day with the amount of white noise that they're surrounded by?
Yeah, I mean, they're different. I don't know how many ministers I would have served under, you know, as a very senior, a flag officer. And I was lucky in many respects. Some people would find that amusing. I had a lot of interactions, just because of the jobs I had. I was interacting with them more than others. And they were all different. They were all different based on their personalities. They were different based on their political circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, minority governments are different than majority governments. Governments under constraint are different than governments that we're seeing now. So I'm not going to speculate on what's going on today, but
and how much, I would say, not to jump too far ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, that's fine.
How much, you know, do you have your kind of finger on the pulse in terms of who do you foresee being the future Minister of National Defense?
No idea. It's a political decision. And this is this is interesting, right? Because, and it's no slight on anybody. What we as military professionals and the community around us think is a good choice for a Minister of National Defense is not what the political leadership of the day thinks is a good choice. And there's reasons for that. And again, as I grew up and learned, I started to understand that more. The ability of a minister to advocate on behalf of their department, which is one part of their responsibility, but also to deliver on the mandate of their department, which is another key part of it, is not necessarily tied to their understanding of the organization or any experience they may or may not have had with it. You know, a lot of, some ministers will joke that defense is, you don't want to go to defense because it's nothing but problems. And, so that there are people who view that way. Others look at defense as, a lifelong ambition. They've always wanted to go to defense. Others are there to exercise control on behalf of the Prime Minister and Prime Minister's office. Others are there to go and keep the troops happy while other issues, other higher priorities in government are looked after. They're all different. They're all very circumstantial.
Yeah.
My experience has been that I think the best ministers are the ones who, it goes back to what we were talking about, I don't know how long ago, the ones who are genuinely curious, the ones who really want to understand, and the ones who are prepared to take a little risk. Now that's as somebody who is there as a very senior leader, institutional leader in the organization.
Sure.
Those started to become, to me, the defining characteristics of, okay, is this good or not good?
Right.
Getting money doesn't seem to be the same challenge it was a few years ago. And so, the issue that the government deals with on any given day, and we're seeing it right now, is how do they effectively manage all of the demands and all of the challenges that they're trying to manage concurrently.
Yeah.
Right. And you can think of any tactical or operational scenario that's got nothing to do with budgeting. It has to do with something else. You've only got so much to go around. You've only got so much ammunition. You've only got so many people. Whatever scenario you want to map in your head, you get it. And so how do you now effectively deploy the resources you have to the maximum effect? That's kind of what's going on.
So for folks that don't know, they can do their own research, but your time as vice
was short-lived.
It's short-lived, yeah, and not maybe it's a poor term, but it's one that comes to my mind. You got railroaded. Your career did not finish the way that I'm sure you foresaw happening.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're open to just chat a little bit about what that experience was like. So difficult time, 2016, 17.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, Randy, you're a friend and I respect the question. There's things I can talk about, things I can't talk about. You get that. I think your listeners will respect that. So let me just unpack this. So, I became the vice chief in the summer of 2016 after 3 years as head of the Navy. As head of the Navy, I did a whole bunch of things. Some of them were provocative, some of them weren't, some of them, And so there was a bit of a shuffle at the top, and the CDS at the time was General John Vance, who was a friend of mine. We were kids together. Most people maybe don't know that. Our fathers were in the same regiment. And he asked me to become his vice chief. And I said, yeah, I'd happily do that, because there were some things I wanted to try and fix that we talked about earlier because of the timing, where we were, and leaving the campsite in better shape. I hadn't finished the job, in that respect. So, I took the job, and then in January of 2017, I was suspended. And I was suspended because I was under investigation by the RCMP for an alleged case of breach of trust, whereby I was accused of having influenced a procurement to get a temporary replenishment ship. So for your listeners, the Navy has a variety of different platforms. Any given Navy, they're all different. Big ones, small ones, flat ones, fat ones, skinny ones, ones that go under the water. We call them submarines. In order to keep all this stuff going, you need replenishment ships. And so replenishment ships, as a friend of mine called them years ago, are basically floating Canadian tires. Okay.
Right.
They're full of gas, ammunition, spare parts, all this kind of stuff. They have a hospital on board, all that kind of stuff.
Amazing.
So you go with a group of ships, and the group of ships can only carry as much gas as they can carry. They can only go as far as they can go. And then you bring one of these big ships with you, and that allows you, it's a massive enabler.
It's a force multiplier.
Exactly, a force multiplier. And so sadly, and we go back to our conversation about life cycles of equipment and how we hang on to things too long. Our replenishment ships of the day had been built in the 60s. They were long overdue replacement. The replacement program was a shit show, to put it bluntly. It's well documented. Anybody wants to go check it all out. And then one of them had a massive fire, which is one of the most terrifying things you can have in your life at sea. And that ship was destroyed. Thankfully, no serious injuries, no loss of life. It was incredible. It was a miracle. And then the other ship was, it was deemed unseaworthy for a variety of reasons. So go back to, not drag it out, but I mean, you asked me the question, so you're going to get the answer. It was interesting. So you go back to good ministers and not so good ministers. I had a great minister at the time. I had to go to him and explain everything that was going on with the fire and then this. And, there was a massive amount of pressure because the shipbuilding program was so far behind schedule and things were, not going well. And there was all of the optics and issues management around that problem. And then we had the fire, huge sigh of relief. Nobody's hurt seriously, although, some people are still living with the scars, as you would understand, of that event. And then the second ship, I basically, to put a personal spin on it, I said, that's it, we're done. And my key advisors, subordinates, other admirals coming, well, Mark, we can make it work, we can do it. And I said, no, stop it. This has to stop. And the government wanted to spend money, and the bureaucracy was like, they were just looking at the crisis situation. It was like, stop it. Like, we'll fix one thing and then something else is going to happen. We got to stop this insanity. These ships at that point were 50 plus years old. And it's like, we got to rip off the Band-Aid here and move on. And, to his credit, the minister of the day, he was excellent. He got it. He understood. But then the problem became, okay, well, what do we do? And so we're not going to put lipstick on a pig here. We're not going to take this old ship and make it work. What do we do? And so now we had a problem because the shipbuilding program was promising delivery in a few years. Then we'll come back to that in a minute. And there's no, you don't go, replenishment ships are us, 1-800, call me one.
Not buying one off the shelf.
Right. They're one of the most in demand and yet least inventoried capabilities, because nobody wants, because they're not sexy, right? Everybody wants the fast stuff that, blows shit up,
right,
and, does other cool things, and understandably. So there's nowhere, you can't go anywhere. So, we go to the Americans, we go to other allies, we do this, we do that. We need an interim capability. And so what had happened was we went to industry. Industry came up with a series of possible solutions, and the solution that was selected was to convert a commercial vessel, relatively new at the time, it was only 7 years old, well-built commercial vessel, convert it into an interim replenishment ship, and then lease it to the Navy. And so this all played out, and then there was an election. The Trudeau government came in. So this was all managed and executed and decided upon in the final days of the Harper government. And then the Trudeau government came in, And then there was a well, things went wonky really quickly. And so, then it was cancel that, don't want to do that, do this, do that. And this all led to an investigation that went back to find out, okay, who said what to whom? How did this whole thing start? Were there leaks? Were there not leaks? All this kind of stuff, which was all, to be quite honest, really ugly, very unfortunate. And when it was all said and done, I was suspended for 27 months, and it all fell apart. And and then I was asked to leave, because you can't. And I understand why I was asked to leave. It was not personal. And I know there's a lot of people out there that, are upset. And I respect it, and I really appreciate it. But you can't have somebody in that position as vice chief or whatever who has that kind of profile, public profile, that kind of public support, and has openly, there's no other way to say it, beaten government in a court of law. It ain't going to work. It's not going to work, no matter what people might think. And it's just not a viable option going forward. So I had to go. And
during that 27-month suspension, at what point did you come to terms with the reality of, like, your time in uniform is now, it's now done? It's an unfortunate way to exit, especially after so many years of service and so much positive provided and so much good. And then,
intellectually, probably the day it happened.
Really? Were you hanging?
Emotionally, probably the day in May 2019 at the press conference, when, as much as, they gave me, the chief, like I said, as a friend, Jen, he got me a new building pass so I could go back in the building. I knew that it wasn't going to work. I couldn't, there's no way. The government, how do you do that? How do you can't do that as a government. It's not going to work. So, I felt betrayed. It took me a long time. I struggled with my departure from the military. I didn't have a depart with dignity for obvious reasons. I had no regrets. I did not a single regret. I knew what I had done. I knew what I hadn't done. I knew that it was, we had the capability was at sea. It's still at sea today. Well, it may not be at sea today, but it's there. Yeah. People remind me of this all the time. I don't like talking about it, 'cause I'm a pretty humble guy. I'm like, people say to me, hey, the new ones are delayed again. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So now we're on the cusp of 2026. This discussion took place in 2016, 15, 16, decision made in 16, suspension in 17. I left in 19. It's now 2026. The interim capability is still there, and the new capability is behind schedule and over budget again. And I'm not looking for, I sleep well. I don't need, any recognition here, but it just, my regret, I said I don't have any regrets. I don't have regrets about my actions. I do have, I think, one or two regrets that we didn't learn anything from this. And we may have learned the wrong things. I think there was a real cultural impact. I know institutionally, a lot of friends, peers, subordinates were scared shitless, to put it quite honestly. That sends shockwaves through the institution. So how much risk are you prepared to take on a personal level or a professional level? And so, I don't think we learned what we could have learned.
But one thing you said, something that just resonated with me. You sleep well at night. I'm not in your shoes. I'm not in your head, but I would believe, with righteous intentions, your decisions that you made based on what was happening at the time were for the betterment of the organization. So
that was my only motivation. So, I had no, we're nudging up on the line here, but that's okay. There was no personal motivation. We needed a capability, and this was a great capability. And you know what? There were hundreds of people involved in making this work. Yeah. And it wasn't, and any one of those people not doing their jobs, or any one of those people not being committed to, once the decision was made that this was the path we were going to go down, to actually making it happen, it wouldn't have happened. And so, it is a truly shared success. I know that in terms of folklore and history, it's all tied to me, and you know what, I respect that and I appreciate it. But at the end of the day, like anything, it was a team effort. Lots of nights of no, lots of yeah buts, lots of people sticking their broom handles in the spokes of progress. But we got where we needed to be. But it was punitive. This is where the culture of the organization could be nasty, not punitive to me. Like I said, the impact on others, taking risk, speaking out, being unorthodox, looking for innovative solutions. The system doesn't reward that, right? And even the budgeting and financing, this was all supposed to have been paid for a different way, and it wasn't, and the Navy ended up eating it out of it. It just became an unnecessarily nasty experience for everybody. I guess just kind of leave it at that.
But the positive, though, is you probably saw like the brotherhood, where institutionally maybe, there's lots of naysayers and negative backlash, but then people that know you well and, been with you throughout your career, there's probably a lot of, hands on the shoulder saying, attaboy.
Absolutely. And more, this, the circumstances are different, but I know a lot of your listeners, your viewers, they're dealing with their own struggles, and maybe some demons. And just to know that it may not be 100%. Like, I lost some friends over this, I'll be honest. But I also made some new ones. And you really know who your friends are, the ones you can count on. A lot of them had nothing to do with the military. But to just know that people have your back and they're looking out for you. It's just hard. Look, not to dwell on this. I was really sick a while ago, 20 years ago or so. I was diagnosed with cancer, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and I say to people all the time, it's harder for the patient. It's relatively easy because you just do what you're fucking told, right? And you do your treatments and you get on with it and you get better. And if you're lucky, you're successful and you can carry on with your life. For the people around you, it's horrific. It's terrible. It's like watching your loved one struggle with mental illness or addiction or any of these things. And please, listeners, don't misinterpret. I'm not comparing these things in relative. I'm just saying the impact on the loved ones is disproportionate to the impact on the individual. I was in a fight. I knew I was in a fight. It's not the fight I signed up for, but I signed up to fight, at the age of 17 or whatever the frig it was. This just happened to be my fight. my wife, my family, my close friends, they didn't sign up for that shit. And so, that's hard. But it speaks to resilience.
Oh,
It
yeah.
speaks to
Yeah.
character. It speaks to all of those things. Fitness, mental health.
Yeah.
You gotta look after yourself,
Mhm.
and make sure you look after the people around you as best you can. Don't be an asshole. That one's hard for me. I got to work on that one every day. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a rambling response, but
No, not really. Like, I think that crucible that you just shared, that's a long time that you went through it. Your family's with you, through the thick and thin. Lost some friends along the way, gained some new ones along the way. When you look back, years later now, and kind of, I guess it'd be tough to quantify the character that you are now would not be the same had you not gone through that experience.
No.
Right? So,
No, and I am a better person as a result of this experience in many ways. There is a sense of vulnerability, arguably humility. I am more aware of not everything is as black and white as it seems sometimes. No regrets whatsoever. I said that, and I stand by it. And I think, Randy, to your question, the essence, I was given a gift. This may sound weird. The entire experience gave me a public profile and a platform that I am very protective of and very aware of, and I feel a responsibility for. Okay. And it's not about me personally. It's about my ability to advocate and to contribute as best I can constructively to the public debate.
yeah.
People still want to hear what I think about things. The media asks, I have the opportunity to write the occasional article and stuff like that. That will, at some point, my best before date, arguably it was gone long ago in some respects, but from a public profile perspective, at some point that will expire, and I'm okay with it. And when it happens, it happens. It won't bother me. I won't feel a sense of loss because of that. But while I have it, I use it, and I use it sparingly. Some would argue not sparingly enough, but I use it responsibly to try and affect the conversation.
Yeah.
So whether it's about the culture of the armed forces, or whether it's about procurement, or whether it's about having our heads up our ass with respect to geostrategic events, or whatever it is, I engage because I feel an obligation to do so, because of the literally thousands of people who supported me and my family during that thing, financially in many respects, and perhaps just morally. And I feel that I owe it to the broader institution.
I think it's remarkable where you may no longer be donning the uniform, but you're still in service to others in the nation. As a consultant, you've got a ton of experience. And I think it'd be foolish for institutions not to reach out to you and ask for advice on certain things, given the experience that you have and what you've gone through, your wealth of knowledge, and it's still providing and giving back to Canadians. So that's something to be proud of.
And I enjoy it. But it goes back, it's unfinished business, right? It's leaving the campsite, and, our campsite's got some challenges right now.
Oh, yeah.
We need to,
Yeah.
and we all need to to contribute.
All of
And
us.
there's never, I mean, I keep my judgment to myself. I have lots of it. I have lots of biases. We all do. It's never, I learned that, you know, as soon as you go political, or as soon as you start on any kind of attack, it's now, you've just completely undermined your own message.
Agreed.
So I will speak about government in general. If I have something nice to say, I'll make it personal. If I don't have something nice to say, I keep it generic. But you know, I think, you know, and I think, you know, there's a couple of good things happening. We got a new defense investment agency stood up. It's the most significant step any government in this country has taken in decades.
It's positive.
It is positive.
Yeah.
We've got massive increases in the budget.
It's positive.
We've turned the corner on recruiting on raw numbers. I keep pointing that out to people. Yeah, that's good. I'm not sure. We have to get into the micro of, are we actually bringing the right people into the right trades or occupations?
Right.
But at the macro level, we're starting to, we've got people signing up again. There's interest again. These are all very positive indicators that we're on the right track.
And that's great, because, you know, we, you know, here with the channel and what I'm doing with Direct Action, it's being straightforward and, you know, calling a spade, being honest, but with an undertone of positive. And there's negative everywhere. We don't have to look very hard to find the
That's
negative.
easy. It's always easy to go negative, right?
But trying to find and create positive solutions with a message that's got a positive undertone, that's what we're trying to do here. You know, you and I have been chatting for, you know, over an hour now. It's been awesome. I could definitely dive deeper on some of the procurement issues, which I'd really find interesting to hear your perspective on that. But ending on a positive, you know, if a young 20, 21-year-old, you know, was interested in joining the Navy, or even what advice would you give yourself as a 20-year-old joining the Navy today? What advice would you give them?
Those are two different questions.
All right, well,
the advice I would give myself was stop being such a smartass.
Okay.
Because I was a smartass.
Right.
Okay. And now, mind you, it worked out.
Along the
But
way,
there was some timing issues too. I was lucky in a lot of. I'm not sure some of the attributes that I would have displayed early in my career would necessarily be as well received today, which is more a condemnation of the organization than it is of the individual attributes.
a little bit more sensitive today than back then, where you could get away with saying certain things.
Yeah, or doing certain things. Yeah, exactly.
In that upbringing in the early years, like, you know, was it a thing where, you know, somebody stepped out of line, maybe somebody took a shot at you? Like, was that a thing? Because
not in my personal experience, but I will tell you, I had two. Mentors above and mentors below, and you'll relate to this. I know you will, because this is some of the most powerful mentors I had were actually subordinates. Your listeners may struggle with that if they haven't been around the military.
Yeah.
You know, some senior sailors who took me aside a couple of times and said, hey, look, sir, you know, smarten up. Don't do this, don't do that. I'm making light of it. It was much more substantial than that. But that was the essence of it. And they must have seen something to have caused them to make that investment.
Sure.
Okay. And I am like, I knew at the time, okay, this is all right. They're making a point here. I got to pay attention. Like, don't blow this off. Don't dismiss it. So that's it. And then mentors above, right? Who you kind of learn from. The essence of the institutional piece, you know, every opportunity is a learning opportunity. It's up to people to decide how they want to learn from it. And I lost thought there. Where were you taking me? Sorry, I go back to
the advice that somebody like.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I'd join in a nanosecond. You know, just try it out and don't be worried about, oh, I know I was, you know, for me is, okay, first thing is do not judge success by visible. The military is a great organization. You and I both love it for very similar reasons. One of its pitfalls is your perceived value to the organization is erroneously reflected in the stuff you hang on your uniform. Okay? I remember saying this at staff college or something as a student, and people thought I was nuts. But I said, look, part of our problem is we weight and judge everything that people say by looking at what's on their sleeve or what's on their shoulder or, you know, da-da-da-da. Now, there's good to that and bad to that, right? Like, you know, somebody, you know, oh, okay, they have competency, they have skills, they have, you know, that's different. But, you know, so success is not measured by stripes, bars, or chests full of medals. You have to come to grips with what your own personal measures of success are. And it's hard in an organization that is so weighted on metrics and progression and everything else, right? So it's easy to say as a retired senior vice chief to say, don't get hung up on that stuff.
Yeah.
But it is, I genuinely believe it. And I guess what I would say is you can't ignore it. So I'm not being naive about this, but don't let that become the focus. Right.
Yeah.
Like that, do the right thing. So this is the problem, you know, there's doing things the right way and doing the right thing. Sometimes you have to make a tough choice.
Yeah.
My experience that we were discussing earlier could be one of those examples. Doing the right thing, maybe not the right way, whatever. Like, but these are all circumstantial. It depends on the context. What situation are people in? What's the environment they're in?
Yeah.
How permissive and engaging and supportive an environment are they in? Are they in a culture where there is a allowance for mistake? There's an allowance for taking risk. You know, there's a difference between taking some professional risk in order to do something better or smarter, faster, deadlier, whatever, and just being an idiot or an asshole, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that would be my second element. Don't be hung up on pursuing the perceived metrics of the institution.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You know, we had a thing in the Navy, still do. You have to go through a command qualification process. And so I remember some people are immediately successful. Some people struggle. Some people never get through it. I was a struggler. But I was so motivated to do it, not just because I wanted to go on and do command later, but because I was so sick and tired of having my opinions dismissed in conversations or whatever, because I didn't have the qualification. So it turned out it made no difference, but in my mind, it was, I got to get through this hoop, because if I don't get through this hoop, then I can't get my point across because nobody's listening to me, you know, kind of thing. So it was like a personal thing. So I just use that as an example, right?
That's a good example.
And you know, never forget where you came from. So back to the whole mentoring, mentoring from below, mentoring from above.
Yeah.
I, as a 3-star, in meetings, in mentoring sessions with other people, I would vividly remember things that Master Seaman, well, we don't call them Master. Yeah, we do still call them Master Seaman. We changed the ranks. I got to keep track. Petty Officer so-and-so said to me when I was a junior officer, or that the captain that I mentioned earlier, God, bless him, he died a few years ago of cancer, unfortunately. But who I learned from. These guys, like, they never forget where you came from, no matter where you are in the food chain. And I don't mean in a superficial kind of performative way. Oh yeah, I remember my roots. No, I mean really remember.
That's good. That's good advice, not just for anyone in the military, but just in life in general. We all either become successful or not. In some cases, when we become successful, it's because of people we surround ourselves with, or some assistance we've gotten along the way.
I think it's still the case today. I hope it is. There's a reason why we include cleaning stations in the training routine of junior officers, because they all contribute to the dirt, the mess,
right.
And they're all living in the same tin can together for long periods of time. So, that's the point of never forgetting where you come from. Right?
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clean together, suffer together, celebrate together.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well done. Oh man, this is awesome. Thank you so much for making the time.
Randy,
Mark. It's
I
been a
really
pleasure.
enjoyed it as well. So,
well, best of luck. Enjoy the holidays with you and your family, and maybe we'll do a part 2 in the new year.
Whatever you want to do.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.